Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello, my name is Adelia Dwi Rahmawati. My student number is A320200159 and I'm from class D, Applied Linguistics. In this material, we will study about the introductions, Hymns concept, Canal and Swain's concept, Bachman and Palmer's concept, Salz-Murcia, Dornier and Turrell's model, and Pauly-Kostka-Smith's concept. The first is introduction. The knowledge of the language and the ability to use that knowledge to interpret and produce meaningful texts appropriate to the situation in which they are used. It corresponds with Ellie's statement that the goal of learning a foreign language is concerned with the ability to use language in communicative situations. And the point of language teaching is to help the students communicate or develop what Hymns refer to as communicative competence. Communicative competence, popular in the 1960s and 1970s. This approach could be said to be the product of educators and linguists who were dissatisfied with the audio-lingual and grammar translation methods of foreign language instruction. Next, we will talk about Hymns concept. Hymns reacted to the Chomsky's description of communicative competence. In Chomsky's theory, linguistic competence is the speaker-hearer's knowledge of his language. But for Hymns, communication was more than speakers' regurgitations of grammar. How something is said is part of what it said. A person who acquires communicative competence acquires both knowledge and ability for language use with respect to the following components. First is whether or not something is formally possible or grammaticality. Second is whether or not something is feasible or natural and easily to understood. Third is whether or not something is appropriate in relation in which it is used. And fourth is whether or not something is in fact done and actually performed. Next is about Canal and Swain's concept. Canal and Swain developed theory of communicative competence based on Hymns' work. The four domains of communicative competence in Canal and Swain's concept can be described as follows. The first is grammatical competence or linguistic competence. What means about grammatical competence or linguistic competence is concerned with mastery of the linguistic code, verbal, non-verbal, which includes vocabulary knowledge as well as knowledge of morphological, syntactic, semantic, phonetic, and orthographic rules. The next is sociolinguistic competence. It refers to ability to use language correctly in specific social situations. For example, it's like using proper language forms at a job interview. Sociolinguistic competence is based upon such factors as the status of those speaking to each other, the purpose of the interactions, and the expectations of the players. Next is discourse competence. Canal describes discourse competence as mastery of rules that determine ways in which form and meaning are combined to achieve a meaningful unity of spoken or written text. And next is strategic competence. Strategic competence refers to strategies for effective communications when the learner's vocabulary proves inadequate for the job and his or her command of useful learning strategies. Strategic competence is how well the person uses both verbal form and non-verbal communication to compensate for lack of knowledge in the other three competences. Next, we will talk about the Bachman and Palmer's concept. Bachman proposed the term communicative language ability or CLA to replace the term communicative competence. His theoretical framework includes the three components. The first is language competence. There is 2 points in language competence. There is organizational competence, and pragmatic competence. The first is organizational competence. There is a grammatical competence and textual competence. Grammatical competence contains vocabulary, morphology, syntax, phonology, or graphology, and the textual competence consists cohesion, rhetorical organization. Next is pragmatic competence. Includes illocutionary competence and sociolinguistic competence. Illocutionary competence is using and interpreting speech act for specific functions, like ideational functions, manipulative function, heuristic function, and imaginative functions. And next is sociolinguistic competence is sensitivity to dialect or variety, sensitivity to register, sensitivity to naturalness, cultural references, and figures of speech. The next is strategic competence. Strategic competence is the capacity for implementing the components of language competence in contextualized communicative language use. The strategic competence include 3 steps. There are assessment, planning, and execution. The next is psychosociological mechanism. Neurological and psychological process involved in the actual execution of language as a physical phenomenon. Next is about Salz-Murcia, Dornier, and Turow's model. Propose a communicative competence model which represents an elaboration of the previous models. The major issue in this model is its sensitivity to discourse competence. Emphasize on the dynamic aspect of the model and indicates that the different components in the model interact with each other. Provide comprehensive view of linguistic and cultural issues that may affect students' academic performance. And this model is meant to inform syllabus design in communicative language teaching, which include 5 components. The first is discourse competence. Discourse means stretches of language perceived to be meaningful, unified, and purposive. Second is linguistic competence, the domain of grammatical and lexical capacity. Third is actional competence. Actional competence refers to ability to choose speech, act, or knowledge of language function. The fourth is socio-cultural competence, refers to an understanding of social context in which communication takes place. And the fifth, strategic competence, refers to the coping strategies that communicators employ to initiate, terminate, maintain, repair, and redirect communication. The next is to talk about Pauliowska-Smith's concept. It's a Canadian language. Communicative proficiency is the ability to interact, express, and interpret meaning, and then create discourse in a variety in social contexts and situations. The communicative proficiency in CLB consists of 5 distinct competencies, which look very similar to the competencies discussed by Salz-Murcia. The first is linguistic competence, includes syntax, morphology, phonology, orthography, and the lexicon. Second is textual competence, include cohesion, coherence, basis, genre structure, and conversational structure. The third is functional competence, include humor, using language for a specific purpose. Fourth is social cultural competence, rules of appropriateness and politeness, idiom and figurative language, nonverbal communication, cultural knowledge and reference, knowledge of social context and relationship. The next is strategic competence. Strategic competence is planning for effective communication in a given situation, avoiding difficulties in communication, and recovering from communication. Okay, I think that's all from my explanation. And in the end of my presentation, I have one quote from Edward H. Townsend. No matter how busy you may think you are, you must find time for reading or surrender yourself to self-chosen ignorance. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.